Hello there, my name is Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And in this video I'm going to be making an isometric style RPG battle mockup. This is a rough sketch of the idea, where I planned some of the composition and angles ahead of time. To get started, I'm creating an isometric grid that I can use to build my work upon. Lately I've been using grids to help plan my work, and I'm finding them really useful for keeping things tidy, and also providing some kind of point of reference for the unit size. But the default grid view, the overlay, is of course just a perfect vertical and horizontal line kind of grid. So that doesn't really work as well for the skewed perspective of isometric art. It kind of clashes when you're trying to look at it. So what I've done here is constructed the grid lines through pixel art rather than relying on an interface overlay. One of the benefits of this approach is that I can draw perfectly over top of that pixel grid to create the lines for the battle platform here. And I found it's kind of allowing me to better visualize all the sizing ahead of time. The canvas size I'm working on is 240 by 160 pixels, which is the resolution of the Game Boy Advance. I find that console to have really appealing quality of pixel art, and specifically for isometric, something like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance has a really nice form factor to it. I'm sure I know there are other games too, but that's the one that kind of comes to mind. But in general, that was sort of the idea for the sizing here. I've gone with the format of using this sort of disembodied battle platform as the set piece. To make things more visually interesting than if it were just a squared off plate, I've added a few angled cutouts to break up those edges for a bit more of a unique silhouette. And up top, I'm trying to connect the upper platform as a ramp, where I first tried to use sort of pixel perfect angles, sort of these lines composed of either 1 pixel or 2 pixel segments exclusively, but neither of those gave the angle that I was hoping for, so I ended up splitting the difference and just built a line that alternates between 1 pixel and 2 pixels. When it's fully connected, this looks a little bit wiggly or jagged, so to tidy it up, I've erased single pixels at regular intervals to leave a broken line that appears flatter overall. That approach became a recurring stylistic choice in this work, as it has with a lot of my line work-based stuff recently, and so I've applied it in different ways by breaking up the outlines or changing their color to give a softer blending to a lot of these edges. To finish off the platform, I made these railings that kind of box it in, and those fit together nicely by just mirroring them to the other edge. But then it's important to recolor them to follow that consistent scheme of light, medium, and dark shading for each of the 3 visible faces. To create the character sprites, for the human characters anyway, I'm starting by making a basic body template to first establish the style and proportion. Because the perspective is elevated, I began by making the head and then kind of moved down to the body and then the arms and the legs. This body template is 19 pixels tall, with more than half of that being the head, but I feel like these super deformed proportions really suit the style of isometric. From here, I start shifting things around from that body template to create a pose for my first character. They're going to be a spiky-haired swordsman, because I fell victim to cliche while making this evidently, and I'm imagining their weapon as a lightsaber though, which is why I've added in that slight taper to it. And then to color the sprite, I'm filling in the line work using at least 2 tones for each part of the character. And this is just enough to establish some dimensionality within those pieces. To finish the look, I've used another even darker tone to change out some of the black line work for a colored outline, which helps separate out parts of the body from one another, and overall just looks a bit more vibrant. With the second character, I've gone back and copied over that template, and then I start modifying it again to find a new design. Because these heads are such a majority part of the sprite sizing overall, it's probably the best area to establish a unique look from one character to another. And so the first thing I'm doing here is reworking that area into a unique hairstyle and silhouette. I've also given her a different stance, and in this case that definitely helped for being able to see more of the costuming than in the first character. And so with that space, I've created what I'm imagining to be like a shoulder plate, and then also she's armed with a scepter kind of weapon. What's nice about elements like these are that they provide another way to establish characterization. You can have these pops of color for these costume elements, and then those become kind of unique or recognizable to that character and set them apart from the other one. For the enemy design, I'm starting from a silhouette for the head because I'm going to be making a humanoid dinosaur, and I could picture the sorts of angles that I wanted to see, and I felt like that was the best way to go about it. So from there, I erased inside the silhouette to find the line work. And then just like with the first character sprites, I'm building the body from top down and just making adjustments as I go. This was a fun design to put together because of how different the elements are from a typical human design. So I was trying to fine tune the look of the arms and legs while still adhering to the isometric perspective. Also, I should mention that the color palette that I've been using for this work is what's known as the extended or secret version of the Pico 8 palette. Pico 8 is a fantasy console that uses a restricted palette of the 16 colors that you see along the top row. However, apparently there's a way to access and swap in these extra darker versions of these colors, and I'm not exactly sure how that's accomplished, but either way, the extended version of the palette is posted up on low spec, and the extension from 16 to 32 colors just offers a great range of colors to work with. And in this case, I've used the range of 4 green tones to create the contouring on the enemy sprite, and this really helped for defining different levels of shadow and line weight within the head design. After getting the enemy finalized, I copied that sprite over and just did the old handy color swap and created this variant design. This feels like the kind of enemy that you would see in different colors, and so I've made this yellow one and, maybe some kind of commander of these dino troops. The last thing for the character sprite design is going to be to add a small shadow under each one. And for this, I'm using that grid from earlier to rough out a circle in this perspective. It came in a little bit large based on the tile sizing that I used to create it, so I trimmed it down a little, and then I explored a few looks where there's sort of a dithered pattern rather than a solid circle. I like the sort of transparency that this gives, as well as being a little bit textured in a way too. And now that all the sprites are in place, it's time to decorate up the rest of the platform. And I've started this by using the grid lines as just a basic tile design on the ground, but then I've gone through and erased certain lines to create more of a randomized array of panels. Those grid lines are actually one of the palette colors, just at a reduced opacity to kind of have it blend in a bit. And then I've used the full opacity of that color to darken up some of the line work for a bit of weathering. Then to finish the tiles, I've added an edge highlight along some of them to create a bit more variation. To complete the platform design, I'm going to decorate on top of the existing structure. The idea I had for this set piece style is sort of like where you go into a battle map from the main game, and it's kind of this generic slice of what the overworld looks like. And for this, I'm going to follow some of these shapes and details that I created in the rough sketch, and I'm translating them into pixel art by first using the grid to template out these basic forms, and then taking those pieces and just coloring within them to create an actual design. As I've already mentioned, I've been finding a lot of benefit in using grids recently, but surprisingly, it wasn't something I had tried yet for isometric pixel art, despite the fact that it's probably the best place to have some sort of guidance like this. The grid I put together for this piece uses 5 2-pixel segments along each edge, which I guess sort of works out to being kind of like a 10 by 10 sizing. But I just kind of selected this by eye, and it felt like a good ratio between grid line thickness when compared to the square face within those lines. As far as the overall look and rendering, the cool thing about using the extended Pico 8 palette is that you almost don't really recognize it as being Pico 8. The original 16 color palette is pretty recognizable, and there's also a great style and charm with that limited color set. But with the extended palette, the inclusion of these extra colors just allows for this higher level of rendering than would be possible with the original. So overall, it gives a different aesthetic quality, but it still retains that strong saturation and vibrancy that I love with Pico 8. I guess that's because, the original 16 colors are still in there, so you kind of get that character, but then you've just enhanced it with these other shadow colors. For a couple finishing touches on the platform design, one thing I've done is adding a second layer of platform underneath the original base. It doesn't really imply anything specific, but it helps break up the silhouette even more, and I think it also makes the platform look a bit sturdier in a sense too. And for more detail layering, I've done a round of adding some foliage here and there. I'm building this up using a dark green silhouette and then layering brighter tones on top of that to take on more of the leaf shapes. I felt like the addition of some vegetation like this to this platform design would just kind of suggest the fact that, we've got these dinosaur enemies, maybe they're taking over the world, maybe it's fallen into a state of being overgrown, stuff like that. I'm also creating a really basic HUD design. This was sort of an afterthought, but I think it'll be a nice touch for the context. The lettering is built from a base of 3 by 5 pixels, and then, I won't lie, I used one of those online character name generators, and I found the names Benjamin and Nell for my characters here. Alright, the last thing to do is a bit of animation work to actually choreograph a fight sequence. For this, I was looking for a simplified way to make a looping animation that can give the idea of a battle without having to fully animate like every unique move and keep track of health going down and all stuff like that. I have no idea how many frames that would take to actually do. But what I'm doing here is starting by creating an idle animation for Nell. And it's going to be just kind of like a walk cycle that'll be running the whole time to give that character some life. And then I can interrupt it every so often with an attack. So for this loop, I've got 3 unique frames. There's the original pose, and then there's also 2 that have kind of opposing steps to them. And for those step ones, I have her head bobbed down by a pixel. And here's an example of an attack animation. For this lightsaber swipe, I'm creating a few unique frames by first positioning where I want the hands to move, and then kind of working backwards and placing the saber blade from there. On the last frame, there's a big smear to the blade since that was kind of the largest frame-to-frame jump in the hand positioning, so that'll convey the most speed during the animation. Going along with this, I'm creating a crescent shape that sort of shoots out from this move, and that'll move along to attack the enemy. When the enemy gets hit, there's a single frame of white flash over their sprite, and I've moved them back following that same 2:1 angle of the isometric grid, and the same goes for the crescent shot as well. For the enemy attack, I'm going to do something similar and have them push forward by a couple pixels, and kind of combine that with just a really quick scratching animation. I was actually thinking it'd be similar to like how in the Game Boy Pokemon, the attacks, you just kind of see the sprite work nudge over really quickly. But in this case, I'm also animating a bit of slight movement to the arm and the tail to give just a bit more character to it. And then I'm going to combine this with a quick flash of 3 lines to actually show a scratch in front of the player sprite. So after working out these ideas and attacks for each sprite independently, it's just kind of a matter of activating them at the right times to give the feel of a fight. So let's just go ahead and take a look at how the final battle animation came out. Here we go. Alright, and you may have noticed already, but I was just going to point out that I animated these little life bars here to kind of bounce down and back with each hit, which I was intending just to provide a bit more impact or indication of damage. I know obviously it doesn't make a ton of sense, but aside from adding another round where they all heal each other with potions, I felt like this was one of the easier ways to handle the constraints of this never-ending looping fight animation. And we'll of course go ahead and close this one out with some CRT time. So thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.